Welcome to Books with Noah, a podcast where I talk with my friends about their favorite books. Today joining us is Eric. Eric is an RF engineer based in Boston, and he dabbles in woodworking while he's stuck in his never-ending PhD. So welcome to Books with Noah.
Hey Noah, thanks.
Awesome. Today we're here to talk about Endurance, which is the, 1959 book about Shackleton's voyage to Antarctica. And that voyage happened in 1914. So it was written, approximately 45, 50 years after the fact. And that will be the topic of our discussion today. So let's just start from the beginning. My favorite question is, how did you hear about this book, and when did you first read it?
Yeah, I actually heard about this book from an unlikely source. I was watching one of my favorite YouTube channels, and the host mentioned being a big fan of narratives that involve people who are stuck in some kind of situation they have to get out of. And from that, he said, "Oh, the best book like that ever is Endurance." And I saw that right before I was going on vacation with my wife's family to the beach in the middle of summer. And I thought, I will read a book about being stuck in a frozen hellscape while I'm sitting on the nice warm beach. And so I did just that, and it was a great read. I could barely put it down once I started.
I agree with you on the page-turning aspect. The narrative and the way it's written is just so engaging. It's just one little story tied onto the next one and the next one, and I had the same experience. So, we can give readers or listeners an overview. The Endurance is this pretty badass ship that was, kind of state of the art at the time, designed for Antarctic voyages, right? And he talks in the beginning about how it's got like a 300 horsepower coal motor and, all the different joints and walls, and I don't know correct boat terminology, but are way over engineered and the most, ridiculous that's been made to date. And then, what happens 10% of the way into the book, chapter 4, they get stuck, right? I don't think that's a spoiler.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a historical poke at the hubris of man. But yeah, the excuse me, the Endurance is an interesting ship in that it was actually wooden. That was still in the age when wooden icebreakers were better, because in theory, whenever the ice basically packed in around the ship, it would lift the ship up instead of crumpling it like a tin can. And that does happen in the book. They become trapped in the ice, and the ship does survive initially, but not forever, as it turns out.
Right. So, yeah, they get stuck in between these two massive sheets of snow or ice, right? What do they call them? The
ice floes.
Yeah, floes, FLOE. And then after a while, they end up, without going through the whole plot of the book, but they end up just stuck on one of these floating sheets of ice for like weeks and weeks, right? But maybe we should back up. The whole point of the voyage was to, I guess, get to the South Pole. Is that right?
Not well, yes, but with a little bit more to it than that. So essentially, in kind of the so-called heroic age of Antarctic exploration, which was around the turn of the century, you had various different countries. Particularly, the British were very interested in kind of pushing the limits on geographic exploration. And kind of the holy grail of that for the longest time was reaching the South Pole. And different exploratory parties kind of pushed further and further south. And then the British, they kind of mounted their final best attempt with Sir Falcon Scott. The last name's memorable. I'm not sure if Falcon's the right first name, but Scott, Robert Falcon Scott. So Scott, which is such a badass name, but Scott and his party were sort of, the final best attempt of the British Empire, and famously they made it to the South Pole something like a week after the Norwegian Roald Amundsen made it. And then they actually died on the return journey. And so Britain had kind of lost the race at that point and shifted its goals as a result. And so what they were looking to do after that, what Shackleton, who had been on some of Scott's expeditions, proposed was, someone's made it to the South Pole, but nobody has crossed the entire continent. And so he proposed a voyage and an expedition where they would actually cross Antarctica over the course of several years. And it was kind of divided into two halves. Shackleton's half was the one that would actually cross, and then the other half would come in on the continent from the opposite side and lay supply depots for them. But in the end, both halves of the expedition were beset by disaster. And in Shackleton's case, they never even touched the mainland of Antarctica.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, excuse me, because they left, in 1914, and they were like still stuck in the middle of nowhere with very little stuff, primitive camping, in an Antarctic tundra, like more than a year or whatever later, right? Like the whole journey took a long time.
Yeah, I think it was. I feel slightly embarrassed that I haven't checked, but I think they were stuck for 2 or 3 years because, rather famously, whenever they got out, World War I was still going on. It had just broken out as they were setting off, and they got back and found out it was still going on. So,
right,
I'm thinking 2 or 3 years. I could check, but.
Yeah, they set sail in late 1914 in August, and then in January 1915, it became stuck in one of those ice floes, or I guess in between them, and it's just it's such a fantastic read, and the author does such a good job of just making it so, enthralling. You feel like you're there with the men, like you're freezing to death. And he just describes, the guy had read, I guess, all of the journals and diaries from all of the crewmates that were surrounding and surviving. And it's just a fantastic read.
Yep. Yeah, I think, I think for my part, as I've gotten older, I've enjoyed reading more and more history, but there's still really something to be said for, books about historical books that are written in a style that is narrative and digestible. And, this just, to me, hits the perfect balance of kind of, factual and informative and also narrative in terms of the actual structure of the book.
Right. Yeah, it's broken into several chunks that have their own chaptering number system. So, well, cool. So, as we wrap up, do you want to give your low light and highlight of the book, like your most favorite and least favorite part?
Yeah, let's see. I think my favorite aspect of it, I really enjoyed reading about the survival process of basically, and this is where you really put yourself in the boots of the people who are in that situation. It's like things go from bad to worse, and as that's happening, you have to make a decision. And it's like you have limited information, and it's basically choosing the lesser of two evils. And I think that in Shackleton's case, I mean, what was really remarkable was that he made those decisions one after the other, and sometimes changed his mind. Sometimes they were conflicting. But in that chain of decisions, he basically, in the end, did everything right and was vindicated. And it's very interesting to kind of put yourself in the position of someone and think about, how would I react to get myself out of the situation once I'm stuck in it. So I'd say that was the highlight. The low light, I'm gonna say, if you really love dogs, you might want
to
think about reading this. Let me tell you, and this is a little bit of a tangent. The heroic age of Antarctic exploration was not kind to dogs. Amundsen, who was the first one to make it to the South Pole, his strategy that got him there was using dogs for transportation and using dogs for food, and strategically timing it out such that, his food sources never delayed his transportation. And as he had less transportation because he was eating his dogs, he was getting closer and closer to the finish line. So Amundsen was an amazing man. He did a lot of amazing things aside from just that. But the British of the time kind of turned up their noses because they did not consider it super honorable, the way that he used dogs to do it.
Yeah, they did not eat the dogs in this book, but it's still
not
sad and tragic.
Well, they didn't do what Amundsen did. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah.
And they certainly never planned to the way he did.
Wonderful. And I would just play off of what you said about the highlights. They really emphasize Shackleton's character and natural charisma and leadership skills as really being the reason why this whole crazy expedition happened in the first place and then managed to succeed, right? Because it's just like every single time they come up against these two options, it's like, yeah, you can't predict the future and things are terrible and they might become even worse if you make decision B. But, do you stay, sitting on your little floating iceberg, or do you go do something else where you can't return, right? So it's just so interesting. And they talk about how, because Shackleton had such a resolve to be successful and he wouldn't let anyone, tell him no, that there was a situation where they went out and hunted a whole bunch of seals, and Shackleton says, leave 2 behind because we're not going to be here that long. We're going to move on. And everyone's just like, what's wrong with this guy? We have an opportunity to, store more food. What kind of an idiot wouldn't do that, right? But he wouldn't let even the possibility of failure, because I think it meant that if they were stuck there, they'd be stuck there for the whole winter and they'd maybe die or something. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, I think that was when they were on Elephant Island. There were a few things like that. Maybe the most perilous part of the entire ordeal was Shackleton and a few others taking a open boat voyage across, I want to say it's the Weddell Sea, to get to the whaling station and get help, basically. And Shackleton said, yeah, we're not taking more than, 3 weeks worth of provisions. If we need more than that, we've already died and it's pointless,
Yeah. It's like the old parable of, guys carrying around a raft, and you're like, why do you need that? In case, maybe later, I come across a river, but, if it's not useful for you then what's the point of bringing it with you? So.
Yep. Precisely.
Cool. This has been a lot of fun, Eric. Thank you for being part of Books with Noah. Happy
to. Happy to chat about this kind of book or fiction anytime.
Thanks for listening to Books with Noah. Please visit our website, bookswithnoah.com. You can also find us on YouTube by searching Books with Noah.